Welcome to the Triage Method Podcast Q&A edition, where we answer a specific question that is relevant to those of you who want to get in and out and get practical advice. So, Paddy, what is this week's question?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. How rude of you, Gary, not to say that to them.
Of course.
Because what? You don't even have the 6 silent letters on it. Anyway, so happy Christmas, all that jazz. Happy New Year. I hope you're all no singing, please. I hope you're all having a lovely holiday period. Anyway, now let's get on to the actual question, because this is a question I got on Instagram, because this guy was kind of stressing out about like his intake and his food and all that kind of stuff. He was getting some conflicting messages from the health and fitness industry, the fit fam, the health fam, whatever the fuck. So he was like, oh, like, is it okay to have some quote unquote bad food in my diet if it allows me to stay on track with my calories, if it allows me to stay on track with my macros, all that kind of stuff. And he was kind of in between that stage, because this is something that happens quite a lot actually, because you get conflicting ideologies in the fitness industry, where people are all like really, it's all about healthful food, and even though they only eat about 6 different foods, it's not really healthful. Or you have people that are full blown like IFYM, it doesn't matter what your food is as long as you hit your calories and macros. And obviously there is a bit of a fine line in between those two ideologies, where food intake, the actual food that you eat, the type of food that you eat clearly matters, but also the quantity clearly matters, so there is both a qualitative and a quantitative aspect to your nutrition. And people who kind of or people who dichotomize that and say it's one or the other are kind of missing the boat, because it realistically is both, right? And this is why the information can seem really conflicting, because if I'm saying it's clearly both, there should be a quantitative and a qualitative aspect to your intake, right? So you should be eating quote unquote high quality foods, and you should be eating the correct quantity of those foods for your goals. Where does, again, quote unquote, bad food fit into this, right? Because surely you would just say, oh, well, you would only eat the highest quality food while still hitting your calories and macros, right? And to an extent, yeah, like that's probably the best bet, your best bet, most optimal, 100%. But like realistically, we live in the real world, like that's not always going to be both the best option for the individual at hand. They might have a poor relationship with food. They're trying to work on that. They may really enjoy certain types of food. They may have, a life, if I'm saying, oh, you can never eat ice cream, and, you always go eat ice cream on a Sunday with your kids while going for a walk. That's a pretty big, like, part of your life then that I'm impacting just by your dietary choices. So obviously all that kind of stuff has to be taken into account, right? But to really get down to the crux of this guy's question, like, is it okay to have some bad food in your diet if you are staying on track with or if it's allowing you to stay on track with your calories, your macros, and the vast majority of your diet, again, you can arbitrarily say 80% or 90% of your diet is on point. It's those good quality, clean foods, what I'm talking about, fruit, vegetables, meat, that kind of stuff. Real food, if you want to call it that, whole food, it grew in the dirt or it lived, and the majority of your diet is that kind of food. And he's kind of wondering, is it okay if I have some bad food if it allows me to hit my macros and my calories? And he was speaking specifically in terms of, especially post workout, he's struggling to get the calories in that he needs, his busy job, relatively stressful day life, and there's only a time period of like half an hour between he trains in the morning. So there's only a time period about half an hour between when he finishes training and then when he starts work, and he was struggling to get, good whole foods in. He was like, I was trying to prioritize, like oats and berries and, maybe whey with that, which is definitely a good approach, whatever. But, it was taking him so long to get that prepared and eaten that, he just wasn't finishing it because he had to eat so much volume of it that, it would impact the rest of, or his ability to actually eat that, right? So he was wondering, is it okay if he had something like, I don't know, cereal, or is it okay if he had some like jellies or stuff like that were really fast, quote unquote fast carbs, simple carbs, bad foods, if it allowed him to hit his overall targets and to stay on track, right? And again, there's two aspects to this that you can take into account. First of all, generally he's trained before this, right? So he's training in the morning, he's eating his breakfast because he's training fasted, and he's wondering, oh, should my first meal effectively be, sweets or candy, if you're one of our American listeners. And you can kind of get into an approach where you're like, oh, no, my first meal definitely should not be, this high glycemic choice, but again, he's trained and the rest of his diet is bang on point, and he's doing it in a calorie controlled, macronutrient controlled manner, right? So what are your thoughts on that, Gary? Is he shooting himself in the foot? Should he just grin and bear it? Maybe stop his workout 5 minutes earlier so he can, choke down the oats in the morning before work? Or is it okay if he just eats a little bit of quote unquote bad food if it allows him to stick to his diet overall in a much easier manner? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I suppose when I think about this, I start by thinking about, right, what exactly do we mean when we say good and bad food? And there's kind of two different thought processes on this, and again, there's somewhere in the middle is probably a good place to be. One is just thinking of foods in terms of good and bad, and banning yourself from the bad foods and only eating the good foods. And that might be a simple like heuristic for some people, because if you're like, right, I just don't eat those foods, then that might lead to health in some people. In others, that's probably not the best approach. On the other side of the spectrum, many individuals, and like we have said this, but hopefully adding some context onto it, people who just say there are no good and bad foods. Foods do not have moral value. And it's like, yeah, that is true. But at the same time, there is very clearly some truth to the concept that some foods are better to eat more of the time than other foods. All agree on that without, thinking it's just going to instantly give someone an eating disorder, So there's some sort of typically talking about foods that are nutrients. Probably add fiber in there. You could potentially add in protein in there, depending on what you're actually talking about within the context of good and bad. But that's typically what we're talking about. Is like a food that fits more so on the bad or eat less often side of the spectrum is going to be one that's really calorie dense and doesn't really offer much in terms of actual nutrients, micronutrients, phytonutrients. Could be fiber, could be protein, depending on what you're thinking about. And then on the other spectrum, we've got foods that are much denser in nutrients, much denser in the nutrients that you care about, and potentially lower in calories. So an example of that would be vegetables. Fruits and vegetables, they're typically not very calorie dense, but they're offering a big bang for your buck in terms of micronutrients, phytonutrients, etc. Another thing you could think of would be, lean meats offering you a big bang for your buck in terms of protein, which might be beneficial for a given individual, along with micronutrition that's coming along with that, and it's going to be very satiating. So I start to think about foods on that kind of good, bad spectrum. Then what we get into is this more specific question of, should I be using foods more so towards that quote unquote bad end of the spectrum to try and meet my calories? So I guess the premise there that's really important for people to realize is that this is someone who is probably struggling to reach their calories. So if they don't eat calories, they're going to be in a deficit, or they're not going to be moving towards their goal. So that's our condition, because the advice that we will give now doesn't necessarily apply to someone who is already in, say, 1,000 calorie deficit, because when you're in that position, you kind of need to be getting as much bang for your buck from the foods that you're eating, because you've got less of an opportunity to get in all of your nutrient needs. So it's a different consideration. But in this case, our baseline assumption is that this person has a good base foundation diet that's taking care of their protein. I would be saying yes. I would be saying I think it is a good idea. One of the things that can happen to some people when they're totally afraid of doing this is they can kind of get like some digestive upset. They're always bloated, they're always full, because what they're doing is they're constantly trying to eat more and more and more and more of these really fibrous, really filling foods, and you're left eating 100 grams of fiber per day, and that might be fine for some people. Some people might thrive on that, but for many others, especially if you're making increase you're normally used to, that might be really uncomfortable. So taking that out, a little bit of that out, and having a bowl of Cocoa Pops, or I don't know, Cinnamon Crunch, whatever you like after your workout, might actually make you feel better in terms of your health, and might also take you closer towards your goals without struggling as much. So I definitely think there's potential for this to be a useful strategy.
Yeah, I look at it as well, what you were saying there. If you have more calories to play with overall, then you have more calories to have that are quote unquote fun or bad or whatever you want to call them, right? Like if you have inherently lower calories, either you are a smaller individual or you are dieting, especially if you're at the tail end of a diet when your calories are at their lowest possible, then you have less calories. That means that you have less quote unquote fun or bad calories to go around, right? So, like 10% of your diet, if we say you're 90% clean whole foods, like 10% of your diet on a 1600 calorie diet is like 160 calories. Like that's not exactly, the most, you're not able to fit a lot of quote unquote bad food into that, so you have to keep that in mind when you are actually saying like, oh, 10% of my diet is quote unquote bad foods. Like it is obviously a percentage of your overall calories that you're talking about there. It's not just your perceived, oh, it's only 10% because 9 out of 10 meals are good. It's like if the 10th meal then is like 10,000 calories worth of crap, and then like that's not 10% of your diet. But anyway, you with this whole approach, again, you have to keep in mind that yes, there are good foods, yes, there are bad foods, if you want to use that terminology. Like obviously everything falls within a scale on that. There's going to be better foods for different individuals. Like again, you might have celiac disease, you might have some sort of intolerance, lactose intolerance, that kind of thing. So obviously like food choice is going to be dictated by you as an individual, like what your body actually responds to. And everything we say when we're talking, or anyone says, in fact, when they're talking about good or bad foods, like that, it's a generalized thing, and it has to be, made into an individualized thing by you, the individual, So again, like you were saying earlier on there, Gary, like you might find that certain quote unquote bad foods are actually health promoting foods for you as an individual, because you're focusing on these whole foods. There's too much fiber for you in your overall day. Your gut is all over the place. You feel like crap, and then you switch to something that's a bad food, and it's a lower fiber food, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, actually I feel better. I don't feel as bloated. That kind of stuff can happen. And also, again, you have to take into account that there's the cereals these days, they're fortified, so you might be deficient in, I don't know, iron or something, and it might actually be a great source of iron for you. So you can't really just say like that's a bad food, because for the population, for the individual, it may be a good food, So the whole argument is really wishy-washy, and it's not clearly defined in terms of what is good or bad foods. And this again can be very easily exemplified by the fact that if you ask 10 different people that are influencers in the health and fitness sphere, what are good and bad foods, like they might agree on 80% of that, but there's going to be foods that are like, oh no, I wouldn't eat that. People will be like, oh, I don't eat white rice, it's you're better off going for brown rice. Where someone else, you might get they'd say like, oh, white rice is a great food, so it's like this, it's not a very clearly defined good food, bad food. And again, it has to be individualized to the individual. But to bring it back to the question itself, can you fit bad foods, whatever you want to call them, in your diet and stay on, and it allows you to stay on track? Should you do it? Yeah, that's perfectly fine by me. I literally couldn't care less what foods you choose to eat, as long as you hit your calories and macros, or allows you to eat a calorie appropriate diet if you're not fully tracking calories and macros and all that kind of stuff. And as long as it fits into an overall healthful approach to nutrition, I really couldn't care less what you actually choose to eat. Now, obviously, there's going to be better choices within that for you as an individual. But, I'm presuming the majority of people listening to this are adults, so they can make adult choices with regards to their food. Like I know you see a lot of people on Instagram and stuff, and it looks like they never eat a vegetable, and in my mind, I'm like, they just didn't grow up past being like a 6-year-old, and they're like, oh, I don't eat vegetables. Like imagine saying you don't eat vegetables and you're a 30-year-old. Like that I'm sorry, like there's something up there. You need to go back, graduate from childhood because you didn't pass. So like obviously there is a spectrum in terms of food choice, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because yes, there is a qualitative aspect to nutrition, but there's also a quantitative, and those two have to interplay together. And you as an adult have to make the best choice available to you at a given time in a given moment. In this case, the individual, yeah, it's probably a great idea to have some food, that's a quote unquote bad food if it allows you to hit your calories overall. And again, this guy was trying to gain weight, and it allows him to hit his calories overall, and he's not fucking trying to force feed himself 150 grams of oats before he heads into work in the morning. He's like, okay, cool, I can have some jellies and a protein shake or something, and it's like, boom, there, I got the exact same amount of calories. Yeah, I dropped off on some fiber, some phytonutrients, whatever else. But you look at the rest of his diet and it's like, okay, you're literally eating like chicken, beef, fruit and veg, all kind of quote unquote good food. So it's like, I really don't care that, a small portion of your day is quote unquote bad foods, because it allows you to then stick to a better diet overall. But again, the converse of this, if this individual was dieting, they were, on low calories, would I be happy about it? I personally wouldn't care. But if it was me doing that, I probably wouldn't be effectively wasting those calories on low satiety foods and low nutrient dense foods. I'd probably stick to something more filling, more satiating, and more bang for your buck, as Gary was saying earlier on. So again, it obviously depends. Again, that comes back to the fact that there is a qualitative and a quantitative aspect to the diet. They interplay together. As I said earlier on, if you have more calories, you have more of that quantitative, you can get a little bit more fun with the qualitative. But if you have less of that quantitative, then unfortunately you have to be a bit more strict with the qualitative aspect of your diet. Do you have anything else to add to that, Gary? I think that answers the question. And obviously, people who are listening to the podcast, we've talked about this kind of stuff before. Hopefully this is all just kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm just nodding my head along with these guys as they talk because, this is good information, but, I've heard it all before. Hopefully at this stage, most people are kind of aware that, yes, there is a quantitative and a qualitative aspect to the diet. There's better choices. There's always better choices, but it depends on the individual, the situation at hand, and then effectively you being an adult and navigating your way through the environment as a whole.
Yeah. So the only other thing that I would add would be the potential downside, I guess, of not accepting this advice, because like I've seen this in some individuals before where this very issue is their main limiting factor, in that they're not able to sustain a calorie surplus as a result of not being willing to go outside of the realm of the foods that they consider to be healthful or to be bodybuilding foods or fitness foods or whatever. And as a result, they end up like just stagnating or regressing or never really getting to where they want to with their goals. And you have to remember that is like, could potentially be an unhealthful outcome too. There's a psychological downside to constantly feeling like you're never making any progress. That obviously depends on who you are and how much you care about your goals, but there's something that can potentially affect your health there. Similarly, let's say there's a circumstance where someone has low muscle mass, or they've got low bone mass, or that they're underweight and weight gain is actually priority. If they're not willing to accept the eating some of these foods that might make it easier to get calories in, they could potentially be at risk of different diseases in later life, or potentially a poorer quality of life as a result of them being underweight, them having low muscle mass, them being weak, having low bone mass. So it's not benign to not accept. So you kind of have to choose, what is going to be helpful for you within this context, So while you don't necessarily want to go totally overfeeding on like just ice cream, probably not the best approach. I think most people would agree on that. You also don't want to be the person that's just only eating, meat and salad because you're afraid to gain any sort of weight ever, if that's something that's potentially important for your health, for your goals, for what you care about. So yeah, that would be
Yeah, and
the only
just kind of add to that as well, like obviously again, you can overtake this information and go, oh yeah, well I can eat whatever fuck I want, and you're out there 6 nights a week banging back burgers and lots of cheese and whatever greasy fatty foods, whatever it is, and you're just like, yeah, well I'm still hitting my calories, but the vast majority, the vast majority of your day is like, okay, yeah, I drank a whey protein shake and had a leaf of lettuce because I'm effectively saving all my calories for that huge meal I'm going to have later on. Like obviously, again, like that's not necessarily a healthful approach, where you're effectively giving yourself an binge eating disorder, but you're still hitting your calories, bro. It's like that's not what we're saying either. Again, quantitative and qualitative aspect to the diet. It shouldn't be that hard. Again, if you have more calories to play with, you can play with them a little bit more. If you have less, you can play with them a little bit less, but that doesn't mean that you just ignore one aspect, either the quantitative or the qualitative. Like you still have to keep those things in mind. And like Gary was saying, this can go both ways. You can be fully bought in on the qualitative aspect and just completely ignore the quantitative, and as a result never achieve your goals. And this isn't necessarily even just gaining. Like I've seen people do this as well, where it's like they just don't have no clue what a calorie is, what a macro is. They're eating quote unquote good healthy foods, but they're just eating them in excess. Like they're eating whatever, meat, potatoes, veg, but they're still eating too many calories, and as a result their goal of fat loss never happens because, excuse me, while they're eating good foods, they're eating too much of them. So again, it's just the interplay. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what you eat until it matters what you eat. And you just have to be an adult with this stuff and look at the quantity and look at the quality and make a decision. Again, as I said earlier on, there's always a better decision. There's always a better choice, and this goes for everyone, even at the top of the health and fitness sphere, whatever you want to call it, like you could be making more nutrient dense choices. You could be like, okay, well, I'm going to switch out my, I don't know, white rice for Okinawa fucking sweet potatoes. It's like there's going to be a food that you could switch to get a better micronutrient, better phytonutrient, better whatever profile. Like there's always a better choice. That doesn't mean that you have to make that choice. You are an adult, presumably, so you just have to act like an adult and make the best choices available to you within reason.
Yeah, and I think like understanding as well that there's always an upper limit to nutrient density as well, and the problem is that it's kind of difficult to know where that is, and as a result some people get totally carried away and they kind of micromanage. Like it's a small proportion of people, but they end up micromanaging their meals based on specific nutrients, assuming that like more is better. But there comes a point like where you're not being rewarded for just constantly eating more and more of any given nutrient, so like you don't have to be like, all right, my liver is covering this and my Brazil nuts, I gotta get that selenium, gotta get this B6, and you don't have to think about every nutrient. And I think that's
a message. Call it selenium again, you're off the podcast.
Selenium. Right, I'll selenium, fine, selenium. But anyway, whatever nutrient is in question, like you don't necessarily need to micromanage all these things if you're eating a diet that is just diverse. And that's kind of the key message all the time, is that diversity is the main thing that you're looking for. That's why we're typically pretty agnostic when it comes to like what diet pattern we follow. It's like, yeah, we eat meat, yeah, we eat vegetables, we eat beans, legumes, like everything. Get them all in. There's different foods have different nutrient profiles, and if you can get some diversity in there, that's fantastic, but you don't need to micromanage it.
Yeah, and obviously, again, it comes back to the individual, because, Gary says, get some beans, get some legumes, whatever. Like, that might not work for you, and that's perfectly fine. That's not an issue. Again, like, you might be like, right, look, actually, all foods fucking make me feel like shit, and now I'm eating a carnivore diet. I fucking don't care. Nobody cares. Like, eat the diet that makes you feel good, healthy, whatever, but just don't preach about it, Like, no one really cares what foods you are eating. If you feel healthy, you feel strong, you know, you're achieving your goals with them. Like Gary said, we're pretty agnostic about your food selection. Like it again, like if that's your biggest worry in life, like you probably have, you know, bigger things to deal with than the food selection. You know, that's not to say it's not important, because obviously it is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. But you know, it shouldn't be something that governs your life. You know, it shouldn't be something that you stay awake at night. You know, it shouldn't be something that keeps you up. It shouldn't be something that causes you so much stress that you're like, oh well, you know, if I have the Cocoa Pops, you know, I won't be getting the fucking, you know, cardiovascular benefits of oats. You know, so I need to, you know, get that from somewhere else. Like, it really shouldn't keep you up at night. Like, yes, you can definitely make food choices that are better for you, given your medical history, your history in general, your goals, whatever. But again, it shouldn't be something that's so difficult that it's causing you stress.
And to close it off, the way I look at it, there's yet to be a diet paradigm, like one of these extreme diets, that allows you to eat burritos. Therefore, they're all stupid. You know, whether you're carnivore, low carb, low fat, vegan, all of them stop you from eating burritos. And that just doesn't make sense to me. So
I'm going to make a carnivore burrito. It's just like, you know,
wrapped in skin.
Meat, stuffed in more meat, wrapped in tripe.
Nice.
And then I reckon I went to a hit there.
You want guac? No, you got some lymph or bile.
Yeah, a boil, yeah, just fucking squeeze it out there. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up there. Gary, the next time, I think, I don't know what date it is. I think the next time people listen to this, it'll either be just before the new year or the new year. No, it's going to be just before the new year. I think it's the 29th or something. But do you have anything to say to the people? Where can they find us? Where are we at? What do we sell? All that jazz.
So yeah, folks, as you know, you can sign up to the Triage Method newsletter in the description box below. Now would be a good time to do that, because obviously in a few days, it's now the 26th of December when you're listening to this. It's currently Christmas Eve when we're recording it.
Or they could be listening to it far, far into the future, because people do that.
Well, then it's irrelevant.
People send me, people like tag me on Instagram and stuff, and they're like listening to this podcast, and I'm like, that's literally 2 years old. I have no idea what that says.
No idea what it could have been stupid. Probably was. But anyway, yeah, if you are listening to this before the new year, I guess, do sign up to the newsletter, because we'll be sending out some exclusive discounts to the newsletter for products going into the new year. So if you're interested in checking out any of our ebooks, program templates, and the group coaching, then that's the place to find more information about that. Obviously, the newsletter contains a lot more than just that, including recommended resources that we find helpful or that we find interesting. So yeah, get involved. The other thing you could do is join the Triage Method community. That's our Facebook group. Like-minded individuals like you, like me, like Patrick, and we can have some conversations. You can send in training clips if you'd like. We'd be more than happy to have a look at them. So that's a good place to find us. Of course, you can find us in the general social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Check us out there. Check out me and Paddy on Instagram, Skinny Gaz, and The Real Paddy Farrell, although his Instagram image is broken at the moment, I think.
I don't know what the crack is with that. Sometimes it comes on, sometimes it turns off.
Yeah, but there you go. And yeah, check out the YouTube channel. We've posted a good few YouTube videos there. You can also find the podcast there. So, you know, you're missing out on key Easter eggs if you're not watching the podcast. You know, at the start of this podcast, we were showing some free dairy propaganda and you missed out on it. So there you go. Of course, our services, we are taking on new clients as we head into the new year. Now is a good time to get involved. Obviously, some of you might have some crazy goals for 2020. Regardless, we can all, you know, get on the path, improve the way we're working out, eating, etc. So if you need help with that, online coaching is a good option. If you don't need the one-to-one real specific help that's offered through online coaching, the group online coaching is a good option as well, much cheaper. And again, you get to, you know, be part of a community of people who have similar goals to you, send in your training clips, etc. There's male and female options available. And as I alluded to earlier, we do also have the training programs. So we've got plenty of program templates and our beginner's guidebook in the store. The program templates, I was asked a few questions about them this week on Instagram. So to clarify, we don't just give you like one program, so multiple programs. So there's like 8 to 10 programs. And it's based on how many days you have to train. So for example, if you know that 4 days to train is like the sweet spot for you, but you'd like to have a few different programs that you could play around with, then you could have a whole year's worth of training there, you know, a cycle between an upper lower and a full body split, adjust the volume a bit, and there's guidance in there on how to mod things as well. So I think they're a decent option for €10, be discounted in a few days. So yeah, there you go.
You should also mention that we have merchandise now available, even though you don't actually have any.
We've also got clothing merchandise that you can check out on site. If you'd like to support us by wearing a Triage t-shirt, Triage hoodie to the gym, we would really appreciate it. And you can check them out in the store. Triage knickers incoming soon.
We could easily get them as well, but I don't know. It's a bit weird, like.
It's creepy. No, I would not be about that life.
Although I don't know, someone sent you your check-in photo. Imagine they were just like in their Triage gear, like just like.
You have to wear your Triage gear for your check-ins.
I respect that. I'd give them a discount, like.
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
Anyway, I hope everyone had an awesome Christmas, and I love you guys. XOXO. Gary says it is too easy. Bye bye.